through what he considers to have been exorcism to rid him of his homosexual inclinations, has had his complaint against a church in Sheffield upheld. The decision, following an independent investigation, was in fact taken in November last year, but the diocese didn't make it public until last Monday, just after it was leaked to the BBC. Matthew Draper began volunteering at St Thomas's, Philadelphia in 2013. He told me what happened to him.
Early on in my experience at the church, they encouraged me to go through a prayer weekend where they prayed that my same-sex attraction would be removed. What they basically said was that I was agreeing with Satan that I was gay. They then put me through a process of removing those demons, which is a really horrific experience. They sort of indicated that everybody had to transform themselves to be the most like Jesus that they could be. And so sort of in a very light way, they indicated that your sexuality can fall under that category.
Well, you say it was a horrific experience, what they then put you through. Can you tell us what it was?
I had a prayer session with some quite highly respected members of the congregation where they gave me prayers in which I was to renounce my agreement with Satan and to renounce the demons of homosexuality that I'd allowed into my life. They even told me that they could see those demons going out of the window of the room that we were in their presence. I believed it as well. And in my soul, just really tried to suppress what it was to be gay. And I hadn't had a relationship or anything like that at that point. And the fact that I was attracted to other people was seen as quite sinister, I guess, to them. They wanted to change me so I would have the opportunity to have the kind of family they wanted people in their congregation to have.
Psychologically, that must have been extremely painful, trying to pretend that you weren't really who you knew you were.
Yeah, it was very difficult. I think, being so sort of deeply involved in the church as well. And then after that experience, feeling like I hadn't really changed, but sort of trying to pretend to myself maybe that I had, and then, sort of trying to conceal parts of whether I was still who I felt like I was.
And was it just a one-off, or was this a process? Did they keep coming back to it?
My experience was luckily only this one kind of very intense situation, but it still, the level of intensity then stuck with me, obviously, for years.
And you made a complaint about this, I think, in 2019 to the diocese, is that right?
Yeah, in 2019, I wrote to the trustees of the church and also to the Bishop of Sheffield. And really the complaint was focused on the fact that when I had sort of said to them, I'm still gay and I'm going to start dating, they had then pushed me out of the leadership role that I had at the church, and also eventually I felt unwelcome in the church and had left. So I wrote to them to make a complaint really about that, and as part of that also mentioned these prayers and that I'd been put through a dangerous exorcism. The trustees of the church wrote back to me almost immediately to say there was no evidence that this had ever happened. So after that, it just felt like they'd completely invalidated what I was saying. Eventually, after nearly 3 years of battling with both the Sheffield Diocese and the church itself, they agreed to bring in Bernardo's experts to look into what had happened and also to look into whether the church was a safe place for LGBT people and for all people to worship.
And the conclusion was reached back last year, and they presumably told you that they'd upheld your complaint at that stage.
And they finally did release the report, having interviewed a lot of ex-members of the church and kind of looked at the culture of the church. They said all aspects of my complaint had been upheld, and that was an incredible thing to read. They released the report just to me in November, and then I have been pushing to get them to release it since. And then in June, the Bishop of Sheffield, who was to provide kind of final recommendations, having seen the report, wrote to me and said that they were just going to file the report away and that anyone who had a copy should shred and delete that copy. So I wrote to the Bishop, and I actually managed to get a lot of other kind of church survivors and other people who I knew to write to the Bishop. And he then turned around and said to me that they'd always planned to publish. And finally, they did publish it last weekend. And that was, for me, just an incredible moment.
Sorry to go back over this, but it's incredibly important to get the facts straight here. The Bishop of Sheffield wrote to you and said that this report was going to be shredded. Did he use those words?
He said that the report would be confidentially filed at the diocese sort of headquarters, and that any copies that were held independently should be shredded and deleted.
That's extraordinary. Did he explain why?
They hadn't written into the terms of reference that it would be published at the end. So they had always written in the terms of reference it would be filed, but they wrote the terms of reference themselves.
Gosh, I have to ask you what your faith is like now.
My faith is a very difficult and ongoing journey for me, and I find that what used to bring me so much joy, now I just find very difficult to give any time to in my life. So I don't know, maybe my faith will come back in the future. I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and see. But in terms of the Church of England and also some of the Baptist churches, I do think there's an ongoing story of them struggling to allow independent oversight of safeguarding in their churches. And I will continue to push for them to do that.
Matthew Draper, talking to me earlier in the Diocese of Sheffield, told us that the trustees of the Network Church Sheffield, which includes St Thomas's, have accepted the report of the independent inquiry in full, and that they have developed and put into effect a comprehensive action plan to implement the report's recommendations.